What's for dinner? Hey everyone, I'm Chef Z and welcome back to my channel, Chef Z Cooks. Today I'm going to be sharing a very exciting and highly requested recipe. I'm going to be showing you how I like to make my very own homemade adobo. Now, there's a ton of different ways of making your own adobo, and one of the great things about making it yourself is that number one, you can customize it to your liking. So if you're like me and you're particular about certain spices, you can either add more or less, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that later on. Now, the second benefit of making your own adobo is that you can control the sodium level and how salty your adobo is. Now, spoiler alert, you don't even have to add salt to your adobo if you don't want to. Now, my favorite benefit of making your own adobo is that you don't have to add any of those nasty additives and preservatives that you typically find in your store-bought adobo. Now, if you're also like me and you're particular about buying organic this and organic that, you can definitely make your own organic adobo at home, which I absolutely love. Now, like always, stay tuned until the very end of the video because I will be answering your top homemade adobo questions along with some tips and tricks. Let's go ahead and get started. Making your own adobo is super easy, and I recommend that if you're gonna go through the trouble of making it yourself, go ahead and try and buy some organic garlic powder, onion powder, and the rest of the seasonings that we're going to use to make our own adobo, because not only will it be delicious, but it will also be a lot better than the store-bought stuff. So we're gonna start off by actually adding some garlic powder. And I like to add equal parts garlic powder to onion powder. Now, depending on my mood, you guys already know I might add a little bit more garlic powder simply because I love garlic. So definitely feel free to alter the proportions to your liking. I'm also gonna go ahead and I'm going to add some Dominican oregano. And this should come as no surprise because I love Dominican oregano. I think that it gives the food that classic Dominican flavor and that classic Caribbean flavor overall. However, if you only have regular oregano, that's totally fine. I will say that if you're using whole oregano, so they're gonna come in the little dried leaves, go ahead and take a mortar and pestle, or a pilon if you will, and just ground it up until it becomes as ground as possible, or until your arms kind of give out, and use that just so that you don't have those oregano flakes in your adobo. Now, another ingredient that I personally like to add to my adobo is some ground coriander, which is essentially ground recao seeds. So it's coriander seeds that have been ground up, and this is another one of those spices that will give your food that classic Hispanic flavor. It has a subtle citrus to it. It is to die for. Definitely give it a try if you haven't already. And another spice that I'm going to add is the turmeric. Now, before I add the turmeric, I just want to say a few things. Number one, I'm actually not that crazy about turmeric, even though it's one of those superfoods that are great for you. I just find turmeric to be a little bit strong. So for my personal taste, I actually only like to add a little bit because I don't want it to overtake my adobo too much. However, if you don't have those same qualms as I do about turmeric, go ahead and add a little bit more. Now, I will say this. Depending on the proportions of the different spices that you're going to be adding to your adobo, it may affect the color. So don't freak out if your homemade adobo isn't the exact color as the store-bought stuff. As long as it tastes amazing and makes your food taste amazing as well, that's all that matters. Now, a few other spices that you can add to your homemade adobo is cumin. Now, spoiler alert, I'm not going to add cumin to my homemade adobo because I have the same reservations with cumin as I do with turmeric. And it's not that I don't like cumin. If you guys follow me here on my channel, you know I use cumin quite a bit. it's just one of those spices where a little bit goes a long way. It's very strong and it can very easily overtake any dish that you're cooking, which is why I don't like to add it to my adobo. If anything, whenever I'm making a dish, like let's say I'm making some pollo guisado, or if I'm making my Cuban black beans, I like to add it myself. And you know me, I just add just a little bit because that's typically really all that you need. Now, other spices that you can add to your homemade adobo is some black pepper. You can add some ground black pepper and you can also add salt, but just like the cumin, I'm actually going to choose not to add ground pepper. And here's why. I personally love freshly cracked pepper. This is something that I do in every single last one of my videos because I feel like the flavor of freshly cracked pepper is just, listen, it is light years away from the ground stuff. However, if you want to make an adobo that's just ready to go because you have kids at home, you're tired, and you're trying to whip it up, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you adding ground pepper. Now, the same goes for the salt. I'm actually not going to be adding salt to my adobo because number one, it's how I like to control the sodium level of my adobo, because what it takes to season vegetables, chicken, beans, and everything else is quite different. And I want to be able to use my adobo to season a variety of different things. Not only that, but I have the habit, as you guys know, of taking my clean hands, going into the salt and using my hands to essentially sprinkle the salt over anything that I'm seasoning. And I already know that one of my pinches is roughly about half a teaspoon. Okay, so the other thing you need to know about the salt as well, is that you can use a variety of different salts, and I'll go more into detail about that in the tip section of my video. So now that we've mixed all the spices together, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna take a small whisk. You could take a fork, a spoon, whatever you have on hand, and we're just gonna mix everything. And as I mentioned before, the color will vary depending on the proportions of the seasonings. Now, I don't want you guys to get hung up on the measurements. Use whatever you like. However, I will be including the measurements that I like to use down in the description box, and I will also include it on my website. Okay, so I have my adobo all mixed up. It smells divine, it smells amazing, and that's really all it takes to make your own adobo. Now, before I let you guys go, just know that you can store your adobo in a variety of different ways. You can use a mason jar depending on how much you're making. The important part is to store it in a glass container that's very easy to sanitize, either by yourself in the sink or in the dishwasher. Now, if you're not making this much adobo, then you can also buy your own little seasoning jars online, and I'll be sure to include my favorite ones down in the description box as well. Now, in addition to storing them in a glass container, you also want to store them in a dry, cool place, because remember, we're not adding any of those nasty additives and preservatives, so homemade adobo has the tendency to cake up depending on how humid and warm your house is. So that's why I recommend in the summertime making either a smaller batch or just really storing it in a dry, cool place. So there you guys have it, my recipe on how to make your own homemade adobo. Alright guys, here are my quick tips to helping you get the perfect homemade adobo each and every single time. And I'm also going to be answering your top questions when it comes to a homemade adobo. Now, the number one question that I got was, Z, how do I control the sodium levels in my homemade adobo? That's actually really easy. You control the sodium levels by how much salt you personally like to add, and just know that there's a variety of different salts that you can use. Now, if you watch today's video, then you know that I actually don't like to add salt to my adobo, and that's because I love kosher salt, and I love to actually feel the salt and sprinkle it onto my food. And I know that my chef's pinch is roughly about half a teaspoon. Now, just know that you don't have to use kosher salt if you don't want to. You can use a table salt or a fine salt. Just know that when it comes to a table salt, it's actually much saltier than kosher salt, because that's just kind of the rule of thumb when it comes to a fine salt. Now, one thing that I love adding to my adobos from time to time is actually some pink Himalayan salt, which is not as salty as table salt. Now, another question that I got was, Z, how do I store my homemade adobo? Now, there's a variety of different ways that you can store it. My personal favorite way is using a glass container. Now, you can use a mason jar if you want something with a wide opening so that you can actually put spoons and measuring spoons in there. That's one way to do it. Or if you're like me, you can also order some of your own seasoning jars on the internet, and they come with caps and they come with little things that look like all the store-bought stuff that you see. And I'll link my favorite ones down below. Another top question that I got was, Z, how long will my adobo last? Now, this is a little tricky, and it honestly depends on, number one, the different seasonings that you use to make your adobo. So if you're like me and you use an organic onion powder or garlic powder, those tend to have a shorter shelf life. And the other thing that will affect the lifeline of your adobo is the weather. So for example, right now we are in the middle of summertime. It's super humid. So the adobo is actually going to get a little bit cakey if you leave it out for too long, which is why I recommend in the summer times, or if you live in warmer climates, actually making a much smaller batch. And it's really important that you store it in a dry, cool place. Now, my last tip, and this was also another top question that I got, was, Z, how do I flavor my adobo? Now, when it comes to flavoring your adobo, you kind of have a few different options. If you're talking about making it spicy, then you can use your favorite chili flakes or your favorite chili powder. However, if you're trying to mimic like the lemon flavor or the sour orange flavor, I hate to tell you this, but the best way to flavor your adobo in that perspective is to not. And it's actually to use a fresh lemon or a fresh sour orange, because anytime you buy any of those artificial lemon flavoring, it never quite tastes like the real thing. And my tip to getting a true lemon, lime, or sour orange flavor is not only to squeeze the fresh lemon juices, but feel free to zest the exterior of it as well, because that's where all the flavor and the oils are. So I hope those tips help you in making the perfect adobo. Comment down below if you have any other questions. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget to join the Chef Z family and click that bell so that you're notified each and every single time I post an all-new video. And if you need some inspiration on what to cook next, go ahead and click right here.